Well, first four games are in the books. Another mixed bag this past week. Well, at least the Pirates finished the week on a high note after a really ugly game this past Wednesday against Hofstra, and they'll try to take the momentum going into the Charleston Classic, the Pirates' first visit to the Palmetto State for an MTE since 2015. 9 years. Damn, it's been that long. Well, welcome into Hoist the Colors. Back to our regularly scheduled programming, coming off the bonus episode with Wagner head coach Donald Copeland. More on the game with him and his team a little bit later on. I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden. Um, I guess we'll flip the script compared to last week's episode where we started off good and then kind of ended bad. We'll start with the bad and then work up to the good. Hofstra at Nassau Wednesday night. It was a late start considering I didn't even realize that it was part of a doubleheader because Louisiana Tech and UMass was right before that. That was another ugly game, and the broadcast was really, really bad in both games. Um, with Andy Katz doing play-by-play, a place that he shouldn't be nowhere near at any point ever. But that's beside the point. Um, but the game was as ugly as the broadcast. And Seton Hall, kind of like the first two games prior, started off well, and then they just couldn't buy a bucket. Hofstra was able to get back into the game. And normally the joke now was like, oh, first to 50 wins against Seton Hall. Neither team hit that mark, but Seton Hall comes up with another L in that one, 49 to 48. I mean, I don't even know how to put into words losing two games in a row by a single point against teams that this team should have beaten. I mean, what more could you add to that, Pat?
Well, look, the reality is that this team at this stage is we could I could run everything I said last week about the Fordham and St. Peter's games onto at least this Hofstra game. At least this Hofstra game. Maybe it things looked up a little bit against Wagner, but this Hofstra game, you could run the same script. They just couldn't find consistent scoring. They missed 9 foul shots this time instead of
Ugh.
8 foul shots. Uh, and then the last play was, I don't even know what, I guess what Shaheen Holloway says was he gave the ball to his senior, his veteran, Dylan Ade Wusu. He told Wusu, you're going to run the baseline. And it's funny, he also said, I was hoping at worst he'd get fouled. And I'm like, that's sort of like the last thing I'd want to have with this team, the way they've been shooting foul shots, is that I'm really looking forward to seeing a guy get fouled. I mean, do I trust that he would have hit 1 or 2 foul shots that would have either forced overtime or won the game? I don't know. I mean, it's sort of, I think it's sort of the offense is a work in progress. I do think if I'll we'll look at the Charleston stuff towards the end here. I am curious to see what happens when they're playing a team that forces the tempo a little bit. Nobody they've played so far, from Fordham to Hofstra to Wagner or St. Peter's, has seemed particularly interested in forcing the tempo. There were a lot of 25 to 30-second possessions in the Hofstra and the Wagner and the four other games so far. So, I'll be interested to see what happens when this team sort of gets forced to speed up their offense, because it's clear that the general offensive strategy is, we work the ball around the perimeter for 20 seconds, and then we do something sort of half desperate in the 10 seconds before the shot clock goes off. So that seems to be, unfortunately, that's not necessary. Again, it gets to something else I think I said last week was there's a difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. Uh, and I think there was a lot of that going on, particularly late in that Hofstra game. And, when you play not to lose, more often than not, you lose because you give the opportunity. And of course, the one guy who hits the biggest shot with, I think it was about 50 seconds to go, was none other than Jaquan Sanders, welcome back. He scored 12 points. I don't think he had his best game at Hofstra. That will certainly not be anything that he's going to, write home about, except for the fact that when he had an opportunity to take a 1 point game and make it a 4 point game with two guys coming at him from 25 feet away, Sanders drains a 3 pointer. That basically it was the last scoring Hofstra got in the game, and it was the last scoring Hofstra needed in the game. So, in that sense, that's sort of like another just, you know, knife in the gut when you see a guy who basically you saw for 2 years he was a little bit of a disappointment to the fans. I think he was a bigger disappointment to Shaheen Holloway. And then you see him come back in an opposing uniform and he beats you with a big shot in the closing minute of a game like the one last Wednesday night.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine like how demoralizing it was. And they showed going into a break. So I think Seton Hall called a timeout like not long after that. And the shot going into the break was Jaquan looking at the Seton Hall bench, throwing it, throwing the three up like that. Yeah, I can't imagine how much that must have sucked. I mean, the most alarming things that I saw in the span of 9 seconds of game time, you talk about those nine missed free throws, five of them happened in a span of 9 seconds of game time. 7:24 mark, Toomey misses two free throws. And then he goes back to the line 6 seconds later and misses two more. 3 seconds after that, Adewusu goes back to the line, misses the first and thankfully missed the second. I don't think I've let out a larger sigh of relief on a made free throw. Not even in any of the dramatic games that Seton Hall played last year, including in the NIT championship. I've never let out a sigh of relief that much because, I mean, you can't be as a D1 team, even if you're Mississippi Valley State. And I'm sorry if the Delta Devils are catching it straight here because they have a great social media team, by the way. So I'm sorry for that. But if you're Mississippi Valley State, you can't be missing five free throws in a row in the span of 9 seconds of game time. You just can't have that. And you're going to lose 99 out of 100 times. Forget 9 out of 10 times. 99 out of 100 times, you are going to lose. I will say, though, like, to look at some positives, at least after they gave up the three to Sanders, DAW knocks down a three to get it back down to one. They get a stop, which they needed, and it was just they didn't execute on the final possession of the game, and that was that. So really, you just got to take it, put it in the memory bank. As much as that hurts and how much that sucks, you still have 27 more games left to make the most out of those opportunities. And it starts with a tournament like this in Charleston, which we're going to get to a little later on in the show. I was a little worried, though, by Shaw with how he worded things about his concerns about the team after a 1-2 start. In the Shaw Sounds Off section of Jaden Daly's post game write up. Shout out to him, of course. Daily Dose of Hoops. That was a little surprising. I'm like, I know we're not in panic mode, but like I think there could have been a little bit of a better response. But like after I thought about it, listen, Shaw is Shaw. He's gonna express himself however he seems fit, and he's authentically himself, whether you like it or not. I feel like that applies to basically every Division I head coach ever, honestly. Um, so I try to take it with a grain of salt. I didn't read much into it, but thank God they responded the way that they did Saturday at Walsh. I thought that response was going to come when they played Hofstra, but instead it came a game late when they played Wagner. Another rock fight, which to the surprise of absolutely no one. And Seton Hall puts up their best defensive performance, holding Wagner to under 30 points. First time they had done so in any game Seton Hall has in 77 years. I mean, I only got to watch the first half because I had a game to work for women's hockey for the Utica Pioneers. little at 2 p.m. So I had to get there at like 1. And I got to watch a side note here. I got to watch you take 91 shots on goal and win 13 to nothing against poor little Hilbert College out near Hamburg, New York. But Pat, I know you watched most of that game. What were your takeaways from another rock fight, but easily the best defensive play we've seen from this team all year?
Well, look, I mean, that's something which is going to kick. I think that's one thing which I think you can count on when you're playing, when Seton Hall is playing, that the defense is going to show up. You have elite defensive guards. Dylan Dede was one of the best defending guards in the Big East. He just puts his body into everything. He's got good movement. He obviously has, he knows how to use his size and his height to make things frustrating for opposing. He's not the most dynamic guy, but he always seems to put himself in good position. And as long as he's not drawing stupid fouls or making stupid chances, and that comes at the experience of being a fifth-year guy. Uh, I think you saw a lot. Scotty Middleton had his best game at Seton Hall, got to play the most minutes, showed that with his 6'6", 6'7" wingspan, he can cause some difficulty for opponents on the wings. Chauncey Jenkins, Chauncey Jenkins is a very good athlete. Not only is he their best option on offense, but he also moves along well. I mean, one thing that Seton Hall does a lot of is they're switching off on the perimeter, so that you do see everyone guarding from, let's say, 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 has to be able to pick up the 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 on the other side. So you don't see a lot of drop off when you go with guys like Middleton and Jenkins and Wusu, and then you throw a guy into the mix such as Prince Aligbe, who's also a very good athletically. You can tell that the reason that Holloway brought a guy like Aligbe in was because he trusted his ability to play defense on a regular basis. Offensively, he struggles a lot, which is why you get the emergence of Yassine Toumé, who made some really excellent plays. I think one thing which worked in his favor Saturday, which was not the case the first 3 games, is you had the return of Manny, or at least the debut of Manny Okorafor to the Seton Hall lineup in the Seton Hall rotation. What that does is it lets you, Tume played exclusively at the power forward, at the power forward position on Saturday, as opposed to having to pick up minutes at the center. You could go with a 3-headed monster of Okorafor, Ershwin, and Yalden. And those guys did an excellent job clogging the paint up, keeping Wagner. Wagner didn't have a particularly good center playing offense in this game, so it's not like they faced the biggest challenges they're going to face this season. But still, the ability to protect the rim, even though nobody on the best shot blocker on this team is probably Toomey, and he's playing the power forward position. So in that sense, you don't have a big shot blocker. No offense to Gus Yalden, but I think his vertical leap's probably 5 inches. But he does the basic things well. He's 6'9". He's a brick house. He stands up straight. He doesn't move very much, and that allows him to play effective defense on the inside. So that the bones are there for Seton Hall to be, probably one of the top 20 defenses in the whole sport. Unfortunately, the rules of basketball is that, you can play as good a defense as you want, but you can't win if you can't score. Now, I do think the offense played better on Saturday. They were efficient. They took good shots. They didn't really force anything, which was a little bit frustrating watching the game, because we're standing around the perimeter as much as Wagner's standing around the perimeter. There's no reason against a team like Wagner you should have. I think we had 3 shot clock violations. There's no excuse for that against a team like Wagner, because you should be looking to force things on the offensive end. I think that probably goes along with the lack of comfort these guys have with each other. They have, again, you're dealing with a whole bunch of new guys, particularly when Okorafor is coming in, and you've got to figure out what his role might be offensively. But again, they shot 45%. That's a percentage that's probably going to win you as many games as going to lose you as many games. I forgot. Let me take a quick look at what they shot from three on
Eight.
Saturday.
Seton Hall was 8 for 18.
8 for 18. That's 44%. 8 for 18 is excellent efficiency from 3-point range. I mean, that could be something to look about. It's not so much how many points you score as if you are playing efficiently on offense. I don't know what the points per possession was on Saturday, but I know that was probably the highest that they had all season because we know how awful the offense was against Hofstra. We know it was pretty awful, particularly late in the game against Fordham, and it totally collapsed against St. Peter's. And part of that, of course, is also because we're missing all of those foul shots. If you're shooting 60% from the foul line, you're getting a point. You basically, unless you're going to the line twice, you're getting basically a 1.2 points every time you go to the line, which is certainly far below what it should be. A team should be looking. We talked about maybe hitting 75%, which is you're giving up at least 3 or 4 points a game at least if you're not shooting at that type of percentage from the foul line. So, Saturday was a big step in the right direction. We'll see obviously the competition. All 8 teams in Charleston are going to be better than Wagner. I don't know if all of them are going to be better than Hofstra. Probably, maybe I'm not so sure what Drake or Florida Atlantic are going to be, but I know that VCU is a step above anybody we've played so far. So we'll see how see how this sort of the evolution of the offense continues on Thursday, and then we'll see if the defense can hold its own against probably the most talented offense we're going to see this season on Thursday afternoon.
So regarding the Wagner game, so I just looked this up. So there aren't any games at the time of recording. We're recording around right now. It's about 2:30 in the afternoon. First game of the day today around college basketball isn't until 6 o'clock. As of right now, Seton Hall has the number one scoring defense in the entire country, which is great. However, they have the third worst scoring offense in the country, which I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Like we got the best scoring defense in the country, woo! And then you look at the offense, like, oh, at least we're not the worst. So you take it for what it's worth. Um, but you've made a great point about the efficiency. When you're shooting 44% from three, I think that's got to be among if you're shooting 44% from three as a team, I feel like the national average is right around like 35 to 40%, somewhere around there. I feel like that's a fair estimate. And that's 44%, that's above average. Just looking at some of the other lines, I'm pretty sure that I think it was Fordham. We only shot 9 threes the whole game. Yeah, that's right. And like that one, we shot 44%. First of all, it took a little bit for this team to get going, but once they did, like they never looked back. I think they trailed by like as many as 5, but once they got into a rhythm and Chauncey Jenkins got going, that set the tone for the rest of the offense because they fed off him. Jenkins is clearly our best offensive player. Yassine to me is number 2, but a distant second because he's been outstanding. I mean, he went 3 for 5 from three on Saturday. He's so far he's over 50% from deep. I was not expecting that. I mean, and the 3 games outside of Fordham, he shot over 50% in all of those games. He just went over against Fordham. So you hope that he's going to get into that rhythm offensively where he's not going to be inconsistent. That was your biggest concern, Pat. And last
Well,
two
what I
games,
will say to one thing to keep an eye out though is that if the narrative is out there that Jenkins is the one guy you have to shut down, and defenses start focusing on stopping Jenkins again, the four teams we've played against, uh, I'm not sure that any of them have. Again, they were good. St. Peter's is good defensively. Wagner is good defensively. Uh, Fordham looked better defensively than I think anybody thought they were going to when we played them. And I think Hofstra was a lot better defensively than people expected them to be. But there hasn't been like an elite type defender who's been asked who's going to, like, for example, the name that should not be mentioned, that the guy who wears number one at St. John's, you would expect that when we play St. John's, assuming that he's healthy for that game, that we're going to see number one uh, be assigned to stop Chauncey Jenkins. And we've seen how he stops other elite scorers. So what happens when the opponent has effectively shut down Jenkins? Can Isaiah Coleman pick up the slack? Is Tume gonna play enough minutes where he's able to pick up the slack? Does Scotty Middleton continue to improve slightly offensively so that he might be able to pick up? I mean, you've got to, Jenkins is averaging what, 13 points a game?
14.
So what was that?
14.
14. Okay, so if you assume that he gets shut down to a game like he's only going to get 4 or 6 points, you got to find at least 8 or 10 points from some other places. Now, again, Middleton heading in the right direction is a good first step. I think Coleman, as he gets a little bit healthier and he gets a little more game time, is going to assert himself more on the offensive end that we've seen him. And I think, again, to me, playing the power forward more often than he's played the first week and a half of the season is going to allow himself to establish himself more on offense. I know that this team might need a lot more than that, given what we've seen so far, and given sort of what our expectations were going into the season. But again, the flip side to that is, what happens when you're playing a game in a quicker pace? Maybe if, again, the one thing, you're looking at the point guard situation. A lot of people have talked about that over in the first 2 weeks of the season. Who plays the point guard here? Is Garway Duel eventually going to be the answer there? I think he played a total of like 6 minutes last week, and they were all in the Hofstra game. I think he's coming off an injury, but still, we talked about what his biggest deficiency was, is that, as well as he plays defense, as well as he handles the ball, and the fact that he's got some good moves passing, guy can't shoot. Is Dylan Today Wusu? I mean, the good and the bad about Wusu playing the point on Saturday was that the good was that he only had 2 turnovers to 5 assists. He looked like someone who has played basketball for a while and has learned how to make the basic play. The problem here is that, he had a very little game to break through what Wagner was doing on the outside. I mean, Wagner switched off from man to man to zone on a number of occasions, and Wusu had very little clue about how to find the gaps in his own defense. So, as much as he can play the point guard, he doesn't really play the point guard position particularly well, and at a level that you might expect you'll need to be an effective offense going forward. I think they tried Jenkins at the point a couple of times. I don't think that's Jenkins' comfort position at all. Jenkins is a shooting guard. I think if you're asking Jenkins to run the point, that's not where he's going to do the most damage. And then your other option right now is, and then your fourth option is probably Coleman. Again, the good news with Coleman is that he knows the offense. This is his second year in the system. The bad news is I also think that he's got to learn how to play the point. He wasn't a point guard in high school, and he's someone who has to get the reps in, both in practice and in games, in order to be more comfortable when you ask him to play the point. So basically, you've basically got 4 or 5 guys who you know, are basically combo guards who don't have who on paper don't have the skill set to be the type of elite point guard. They don't have someone at the level of, let's say, a Quincy McKnight or a Donald Copeland or Shaheen Holloway. If you're looking back at people who just look like the prototypical point guards, they don't have anybody like that. So basically, it's going to be like a job by committee, possession by possession, and you'll see what you'll get and see what you can develop in practice and in games.
Yeah, the point guard pitch situation is a little murky. I will say though, Dylan has done a solid job of, stuffing the stat sheet. He's averaging 8 points, like 5 boards and 4 assists, which it's like I dare I say the like a Timu version of Kadari stats. Whereas Kadari was, putting up those numbers and like averaging probably close to double that in points, couple more like an extra rebound or two, and then add another assist. So I will applaud Dylan for the effort he's giving. And you hope that if Shaw wants to keep moving forward with him as point guard, that he's going to continue to grow in the role. Um, but he's going to get thrown into the fire when you play a team like VCU, which segues into, previewing Charleston. And it's not an easy start because VCU, they're a team that is defensive minded like Seton Hall, but they have a pretty solid offense, which obviously Seton Hall lacks at the moment. On top of that, they're also, I think, top 20 in the country scoring wise defensively. At least that's what I saw on CBB reference. I mean, I think if you got to steal one if you're Seton Hall, and I don't, it's easier said than done. It looks like VCU is going to be heavily favored, like it's like a 2/3 split according to ESPN's BPI. I know that's not really a great metric to go off of, but VCU is going to be the clear favorite in this game. And if you're Seton Hall, you got to bring the defensive energy that you brought the first 4 games and get some more shots to fall if you want to stand any chance of getting at least one quality win and even like getting you in the territory of going 2-1 down in Charleston.
Yeah, I mean the one thing we haven't seen Seton Hall play elite competition. Uh, it was were a lot of people maybe down on Fordham going into the season, and Fordham is going to be better than people expect they're going to be, maybe. But I mean, again, you're looking the difference between what we're playing on Thursday as opposed to what we played at Walsh 9 days ago was a team that's expected to end up 14th or 15th in the Atlantic 10, and the team we're seeing on Thursday is probably the favorite right now to win the Atlantic 10. The bracketology I saw today had VCU in the automatic qualifier position in the Atlantic 10. Of course, their best player is a guy who is familiar to Villanova fans for weird reasons is Max Shulga, who's played with Coach Ryan Odom now for 2 seasons at VCU. He's an elite point guard, one of the best in the Atlantic 10. He's someone who, the defense is going to have their work cut out from him trying to contain Shulga. There's no accident that Villanova tried to go all in to pick him up to run their offense this season. And then for whatever reason, Shulga decided at the last minute that he had sort of, I think he had a verbal agreement with Villanova, but then he changed his mind about a week later while he was in the portal and decided to go back to VCU. Then they have a guy who's got some significant major experience in Joe Bamisile, another guard who's an effective scorer. And then they have one of the great mercenaries in college basketball, Jack Clark. I think Clark played, I think, at Clemson, and then he went to NC State, and now he's finishing his career at VCU. It's going to be an interesting matchup between Clark, and we're presuming he's going to play a lot against Tume, because Clark is another guy who sort of has that stretch 4 position. Not the best shooter in the world, but when Clark finds a shot, Clark is scary dangerous. So in that sense, VCU has weapons out there. And then again, you're playing as unfortunately on the offensive end, when you're playing a team who's got players at a higher level and maybe a little more athletic than what you saw in the first four opponents, that's all the more a challenge for an offense, which is clearly just, you know, I don't know if I don't, it's, an offense that's clearly one of the lowest performing, at least score wise, in the country. Now, one thing to think about is that do these guys get up Seton Hall, that is, for a tough opponent? I mean, again, this is the first time you're playing a team that has, realistic who has high expectations for later in the season. VCU probably has as sort of a reach goal this season to make the Sweet 16. And if they get the right draw and they play out of their minds if they make the tournament, get the right draw and play out of their minds, this is the type of roster that's a threat to make it to the second weekend of the tournament. So in that sense, it's hard to figure out who else. I think Nevada probably has that expectation a little bit, and I think if Miami, who's on the other half of the bracket, gets their act together, they have they. I don't know if this is as good a Miami team as the one that made the finals 2 years ago, but you never count out a Jim Larinaga team down in Miami. So I think if you're talking about this field is maybe not the strongest field that you're going to see at a multi-team event. You've got a lot of teams you got at least two or three teams if you include Drake, Florida Atlantic at Seton Hall, who performed at a really high level last year, who had a lot of turnover. Drake and Florida Atlantic, by the way, both have new coaches this season because Darren DeVries left Drake for West Virginia and Dusty May left Florida Atlantic for Michigan. And Oklahoma State has a new coach as well. Mike Boykin is out, and they've played better in the beginning of their season than they had in the past. There's a lot of teams. I think VCU is probably the team that knows the most about itself. I think if I was to look at the field in general, I think that VCU is a slight favorite to win the whole tournament. So in that sense, Seton Hall has its work cut out for them. But on the other hand, you know, you Shaheen Holloway's probably been looking at this VCU team for weeks. As much as he's one game at a time, our toughest opponent is the one we're going to see next Saturday or next Wednesday. He has known this VCU game has been on the calendar since they set the bracket for Charleston. And this is the type of game, sort of like last year when they went to San Diego, that you hope you are prepared to take on. Unfortunately, as we learned last year, they were not quite ready getting out of the gate in that first game against Southern Cal down at that tournament in San Diego last year, and they fell behind big and made a furious comeback, but got just short. So maybe guys like Wusu and guys like Coleman have learned a lesson a little bit from last year's experience and are readier to go when the ball gets thrown up on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, I can see VCU being the favorite. I think that in terms of who's going to win the first few games, I mean, I hate to admit it, VCU is going to be the favorite against Seton Hall. Nevada, I can definitely see being favored over Vandy. Miami's probably going to beat Drake. And then the other game, Oklahoma State FAU. FAU's the favorite, but I would not be surprised if Oklahoma State picked them off. I think if you're Seton Hall, I think against VCU, you have to protect the basketball, be an efficient offense, and bring the heat defensively. I mean, you did this for the first four games, and Pat, you were right. Like, they gotta wake up for this game. I think they're gonna be a team that is gonna play above Like if when they're playing an opponent that is superior to them, they're going to play up to that level. And unfortunately, we've seen multiple times they played down to the level of their competition. Thankfully, that wasn't the case on Saturday. But yeah, I can see this team getting up for a game like VCU. It's not like you're facing an A10 team like Fordham, for example, or even like a George Mason. Like VCU is by name brand probably the most recognizable team in the A10. At least that's the argument I would make. So yeah, I could see them, giving VCU fits. Essentially giving VCU almost like the VCU treatment, like Shaka Smart's teams back in the, ironically, because he's at Marquette, back in the early 2010s, bringing the havoc. Even down to like Will Wade when he was there. I can see them doing that. I believe they can. Do I think they're going to win that game against VCU though? I have a hard time believing it, but I would not count this team out. I find it very hard to believe that this team is going to allow itself to leave Charleston 6 days from now without a win. I just find that very hard to believe. I think they're going to find a way either against Vandy, most likely. It's either going to be against Vandy. Well, I think to me it has to be against Vandy because if you lose that first game, give yourself a chance to not play in the toilet bowl, if you will, to not finish in last place. So if you beat Vanderbilt, if you lose, or Nevada, depending on how the bracket shakes out, but I just think it's going to be Vandy. If they beat Vandy in this scenario, they get to play for fifth place rather than being in that toilet bowl like I mentioned before. And you're probably going to play a team like, I swear to God, if we get Oklahoma State like we did like 5 years ago when we had to play Iowa State, and then we had to play them 9 days later in Ames after we just played them in the Bahamas at Atlantis, that would not be ideal. But like if we get like, I don't know, like an FAU who if they stumble and lose to Oklahoma State, hell, if we get a Drake and we beat them, like there is a pathway for 2-1. I think at this rate, given what we've seen, I think the expectation and hope should be that this team wins at least one game. And I hate that I'm saying this because I want to have faith and believe because they did show us a lot against Wagner, but then again, it is Wagner. It's kind of like you ever see, Pat, I'm assuming you've seen Animal House. I'm assuming a lot of people have seen it. The scene where I forgot what the name of the character is, but Lawrence, I believe his name is. He got the devil on the one shoulder and the angel on the other. That's what like, I'm seeing the bad and the good, and I'm hoping that the angel talks the most sense into me. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I want to know your take on it.
I again, obviously there are four possible win totals. One would be 3-0, which means you've won the Charleston Classic. Uh, I don't think a lot of people would be betting on that. Uh, but the other thing, when you look at game predictors, I looked at Haslametrics uh, this morning about the game predictors and what the difference is between Seton Hall and everyone else in the field. And there's nobody. Seton Hall would be a 6-point favorite against Drake, for example. Drake, of course, lost their best player, lost their coach, lost a few other key contributors. Drake is basically in a rebuilding phase. So you would hope that if they had to play Drake, which would probably be in that seventh place scenario you just talked about, you know, that's one that if you lose to Drake and you go, oh well, let me go back. I'm confusing things. 3-0 means you've won everything, meaning you beat VCU, you probably beat Nevada, you probably beat Miami. I mean, could you expect a team like Seton Hall to run that gauntlet over 4 days in Charleston over the weekend? Probably not. The second option is to win two games. And that probably means that you win both games in what they call the losers bracket, meaning you talked about beating Vanderbilt, let's say on Thursday, if we were to lose to VCU, and then you're going to play the winner of a Florida Atlantic Drake game. probably Florida Atlantic. From what I saw, we would be about a pick 'em in a game against Vanderbilt, and we'd be, I think, a 1 point underdog against Florida Atlantic. So those are both winnable games if you get there. I think we're also sort of at most a 1 or 2 point under would be 1 or 2 points behind analytically against Oklahoma State on a neutral court. So in that sense, that's another one that if we happen to play Oklahoma State on Sunday is another winnable game. I think our spread against Miami was, I think, about 6 points. Not far off from what the spread was against VCU. We were predicted to lose by 4.5 points. So in that sense, but that's not an unwin. It's not like you're a 20-point underdog against anybody. It's not like you're walking into Gampel Pavilion last March, a 15-point underdog, and expecting to get your butts beat in. When the predictions within about 2 possessions, and all these games are going to be within that point, if you play better than your expectations, meaning your offense runs a little more efficiently, you don't turn the ball over, and maybe you hit foul shots for once this season. You can sneak out wins against anybody in this field. So it's sort of like that weird situation where Seton Hall theoretically could lose to anybody, even though a loss to Drake would be a real embarrassment. You go home with nothing. I think the one-win scenario is you lose the first 2 games and then you beat a team like Drake on Sunday afternoon. The 2-win scenarios are probably beat Vanderbilt, beat Florida Atlantic, if the field plays out the way that you would run prediction expectations. And I think you can feel good, at least starting to rack some wins up, because then you come back. We can talk about what happens after Charleston later. Then you get the 2 big challenges right before Big East play, when we're definitely playing Oklahoma State, but this one's at the Rock, and then we have to take the trip down the Turnpike for Rutgers. So, it's sort of one of those things where, the season could be on the brink if you go 0-3 in Charleston. I don't think 1-2 is a really great result either, because then you're looking at the possibility of having a losing non-conference record. So I think you have to win 2 games to guarantee you at least walk out of non-conference play with a winning record.
Yeah, I think at this point, given what we've seen, I think that is the goal, to not have a losing record. But things can change on a dime. Like if Seton Hall has a really good week and they go 2-1, which puts them at 4-3, and depending on the quality of the wins, and you look at the remaining 4 non-conference games: Monmouth, Oklahoma State, Rutgers, and then NJIT. I know I got the order wrong in that, but I'm like, I had to get from one to the last one. Realistically, you could go 3-1 and put yourselves at 7-4, which is where they've been the last 2 years under Shaheen Holloway. So I mean, I do like Haslam, and Haslam metrics is something that I follow, and I mean, I don't want to say I'm indifferent towards it, because I think I have more of a positive opinion about that than negative. So I think you got nothing to lose as far as I'm concerned against VCU, unless they wipe the floor with you, which I just don't see the Seton Hall team allowing that to happen. They're going to try to take the air out of the ball.
Who's taking the air out of the ball, Seton Hall or VCU?
Seton Hall, without a doubt. I mean, listen, I had to think. I'm like, I've just put my thoughts into words for a second, because
I know we're too early in the season for this, but and the other thing I think which frustrates people is we don't have a measurement of what our tempo is yet, because you've a lot of the analytics you're seeing right now still have a lot of last year's stats in.
Yeah.
So I would cringe to think what our tempo. You said that we're the 3rd worst scoring offense in the country. I can imagine that we're probably bottom 20 in terms of tempo. I know about a half hour, 40 minutes ago, we talked about Tony Bennett Virginia teams, about how they just play slowest in the country, They 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 struggle to score 60 points, but invariably they won two-thirds of their games because they could hold the opponent. They routinely held opponents definitely under 60, and a lot of opponents they held under 50. Uh, and Seton Hall is averaging 47 points a game, giving up. That's the average they've given up. That the Wagner game is going to make that number look really good. But the flip side to that is that no one has scored 60 against us. So really, and this is not something which is pretty, but if you end up winning more of these rock fights than losing more of these rock fights, who cares? Because the only number that really matters at the end of the game, at the end of the day, is wins and losses. If you tell me that they're gonna sort of be where they're at right now, which is where they're averaging, I think, 56 points, and then not 56, because that's they 56, they're averaging about 51, 52 points a game. But if you're telling me the opponents are going to only average 47 points a game, and we end up going 20 and 11 again, I'll sign up for that. It doesn't need to be pretty. It doesn't need, we're not 1990 UNLV. We're not 1990 Loyola Marymount.
Mhm.
We're not going to be one of those teams that scores 90, 95, 100 points a game. But, if it's something where teams struggle because opponents are looking at their stat sheets. You think about everyone getting there. So what happens if we'll use an example, Cam Jones at Marquette, who obviously is one of the leading scorers in the Big East. If you're Cam Jones and you're looking up at that scoreboard and you've said, I only have 5 points in the middle of the second half, when does a guy like that start getting more desperate to get his points? Because you say, all right, I'm playing within the flow of the offense and I only have 5 points, but guys like that want to leave the court with their 20 points. So when do you start to frustrate opponents who are realizing they haven't done anything on offense? Teams particularly like Marquette, teams like Connecticut, teams like St. John's, teams like Xavier, who in theory have to score a lot of points to beat you. St. John's, for example, I watched all of St. John's yesterday. Just as a quick example, I don't want to get too far into this, but if you think about it, they won 85-73. Now you might say, okay, it's really impressive that they scored 85 points, but they gave up 73. So if you took that to a game against Seton Hall and they're struggling to score 60 points themselves, who's to say a team like that doesn't panic because they've been locked down on offense by a defense like Seton Hall all day? It's tough. And people who played Virginia when they were at their peak, making deep NCAA runs, getting number one seeds 2 years in a row, teams got frustrated. Those ACC teams, and they had a lot of talented teams in the ACC in the late 2010s. Those teams got frustrated when they had to play Virginia. So that's something maybe we'll see if that starts to look like something when they're playing VCU and a team maybe like Vanderbilt and some of the other teams they're going to play in Charleston this week. Does an opponent who thinks that they should be able to score and score often, when they're stuck in a game in the upper 40s or low 50s against Seton Hall, do they make mistakes because they can't score?
So, the transition into, final thoughts, about the Charleston Classic, to end the episode. The last thought I'll leave you with is the fact that in the first three games, Seton Hall got outscored in the second half, and they, more often than not, they ended the first half negatively. Like the St. Peter's game, for example, they were up 31-20 in the late stages of that first half. They let the Peacocks score 7 of the final 8 points in the half, and 11-point game goes down to a 5-point game. St. Peter's is right back in it, and they scare the Pirates, and they actually outscored them in the second half. Fordham outscored the Pirates in the second half in Walsh. Hofstra outscored Seton Hall in the second half on Long Island. But the fourth game changed the trend. They were up 26-14 at the half, and they actually outperformed how they did in the first half. Not only did they win the second half, they performed better, 28-14, which again, I tried to see, okay, in the win, what are some things that we need to move forward with in order to become a competitive team against better competition like what we're going to see in Charleston? Well, it starts with finishing the game strong. Yes, starting it strong is a very good thing, but this is a 40-minute game. Like teams didn't sign up to play for 20. They signed up for the full 40. Now to quote Scott Van Pelt during Bad Beats, for college football, like now they signed up for 60. Every team signs up to play 40 minutes. So for Seton Hall, you can't play 20 solid minutes of basketball and just expect to coast on it the rest of the game for the final 20 minutes. So if they can improve upon what they did against Wagner in the second half and play with that intensity in the first half and bring it to the second half like they did against Wagner in every game they play, hopefully the rest of the season. I know it's easier said than done when you're going up against the UConns, the Creightons, and the Marquettes that you're going to see in December and for the rest of winter. I think things can bode well where they might steal one against VCU where they wear them down defensively, and in the second half they wear them out so much that with the amount of energy they have, maybe forcing some mistakes, that they can steal one from a VCU, steal one from a team like Nevada or against Miami. I think there is a lot of opportunity there, and I think that bucking that trend on Saturday, it might look very small and relatively, I guess, irrelevant. But I think it's just something like, hey, keep that in the back of your mind because if they can finish that second half strong and learn from their mistakes from the first three games, maybe they can take that with them for the next 27 and turn the season around. And it's hard to say. You got to turn the season around in game number 3, which I know we were almost chicken littling it, where we were thinking the sky is falling. Like, we got to realize, like, whoa, like, it's the middle of November, but it's something like this. It's a golden opportunity for the Pirates. And that treasure of, potentially stealing the Charleston Classic, it's not out of the realm of possibility, Pirate Nation. Go get that booty, as in treasure, not no, 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 no. I'm just like, listen. I mean, it's only on point for horny Biggie's Twitter. I had to make that out there, and listen, there's Pirates
Plenty of that
fans.
available probably in Charleston, Tim.
Yeah, Charleston is
But
lively.
on the real, that it's not, Charleston. There's a reason why they play tournaments in places like Charleston, because the weather hasn't been the beaches are nice in Charleston.
Yeah,
So there's still a lot of people. I mean, I probably more of the vacationers will probably come down next weekend, but there'll be a fair number of people hanging around because it's just the nature of the beast down there. So yeah, I mean I mean I don't think Seton Hall would ever have an issue with that. I think that for the most part, Seton Hall teams are all business. And I think a lot of these teams are all business because in the world that we're in right now, anything that you do can be caught doing anything. Okay, why is this player, like just hypothetically, why is a Max Shulga hanging around the bar in Charleston at 2 in the morning before he's got to play a game on Friday afternoon? I mean, so that's just an example. Nothing. I don't suspect he'd be one, but you never know. You never know what type of trouble peak college kids can get into when sometimes leave them to their own devices. But I think for the most part, if there's one thing that one thing I would expect Seton Hall is going to be discipline. That's just one thing that Shaheen Holloway won't tolerate any of this stuff. I think he's one guy who I think if a player ever got out of line, you would probably not see that guy as a player much longer. So I think that's just something to keep. I mean, you joked about that on the one hand. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, we live in a world where I think it was what 7, 8 years ago when UCLA went to play a game in China.
oh yeah, oh my
You
God, I
had
forgot that happened.
You had three guys, including one of including Lonzo Ball's brother.
Yeah, Leangelo.
Yeah, you had one of the Ball brothers end up going to a store right outside of his hotel in China and shoplifting a bunch of stuff. So we have seen examples of college, college kids going wild in these, settings where, you've got just a lot going on in a place like Charleston. So that's one thing, that I mean, as much as we laugh about it, it's happened. But I didn't mean to go on a soapbox. That's sort of a tangent there. I think to sort of circle back to what we're looking at, again, you want to see them make the progress on offense that they sort of started to look like they were making, and you want to see if this defense holds up against better competition. Everyone we're going to play over the next over those 4 days in Charleston is better than anybody they've played so far. So this is a sign where your Wusus, your Ligbays, your Jenkins, your Coleman, your Tume, your whoever you have playing defense. Let's see if it holds up against an opponent who's got more potential to score on you, better shooters, guys with more moves on the inside, guys who have proven they can do it. You play Bismail, you play Sluga. You know those guys can bring the goods because they've been doing it for years. They're experienced and they know how to score the basketball. So this is where Seton Hall gets to say, all right, you know what? We may have one of the top 20 defenses in basketball. Prove it on the court and let that defense frustrate an opponent like VCU to maybe where you find a way to pick them off. And then you bring it the next day against a Nevada team coming off being in the NCAA tournament last year. I think they're not the only team because FAU and Drake were both in the tournament as well.
Right.
But the point is, this is a Nevada team that looks a lot like the team that made the NCAA tournament last year. And what's funny was Nevada blew a 17-point lead against Dayton
Yeah.
in the first round because when Dayton put a press on Nevada, Nevada didn't know how to handle it. So when you're playing in Nevada, they have a history of when you do something they're not expecting you to do, of crumbling and folding up against that type of pressure. So again, if you play your game, you can find ways to beat anybody in that field in Charleston, and we'll see what happens. Unfortunately, of course, the way Seton Hall has played the first 2 weeks, they're susceptible to losing anybody in Charleston as well. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what our conversations are like next week after the run of 3 games in 4 nights down in Charleston.
So yeah, no, one thing I realized was that VCU, like they're an experienced team. I think they maybe have one freshman on the whole roster. Like they got an old team on their hands. Seton Hall does. But the one wild card, I'm really wondering what's going to happen with Garway Duval. He didn't play. I don't think he played against Hofstra nor Wagner, if I'm not mistaken. Because I know he played the first 2 games. I don't think he played in the last two. I know he didn't play against Wagner because Coleman got the start. Um, so I'm just really, I mean, if he's apparently like he's had some like nagging injury that has kept him off the court. Um, you
No,
know,
Dole got 9 minutes against Hofstra.
okay, so he did miss the game against Wagner though, right?
Yeah, no, he didn't play. He didn't play Saturday. He played against. What's funny is he didn't do. You look at the box score. He didn't do anything against Zippo. No shots, no rebounds, no assists, nothing. Zeros across the board. In 9 minutes against Hofstra on Wednesday night. So he did play, but it's as if he didn't play.
Right.
So yeah, he's. I again, it's just as a quick point before we go. This is where Seton Hall, the depth that Shaheen Holloway bragged about all off season, comes into play. He talked about, I can't be a team that's depending on one guy to play the point. I need to have multiple ball handlers. Even if those ball handlers are not particularly good and not their classical point guards, he wants to have ball handlers. So that's where you have to trust a Dylan Adewusu. You have to trust a Chauncey Jenkins. You have to trust a Isaiah Coleman to be able to do some things with the ball, playing the point. And the other thing is, let's be honest, the key with this team is don't turn the ball over. If your point guards don't turn the ball over, and you're able to run an offense, even you're at least keeping the opponent from getting easy points, keeping the opponent from getting easy points on the fast break. So that's as much as you say, yeah, we got to bottle it up and keep it tight. Yeah, but I mean, if the other team can't get points on the transition, then you can keep games closer than they should be. So, we'll see what happens. We'll have a lot more to talk about because we'll have that many more games under their belts and games against better opponents over this weekend.
Well, that will all start Thursday, 5 o'clock, Seton Hall and VCU. And then from there, who knows? Hopefully, things go better than expected. Look at what happened in Charleston 9 years ago. Well, they started off, they lost opener against a team they should have beat Long Beach State, but they finished strong. They beat Bradley, they beat Ole Miss. So who's to say, that something similar can't happen? I know we're talking about apples and oranges here. We're talking about the team that won the Big East tournament in 2015-16 that went 2-1 Charleston the last time they went there. But hey, you never know. It's November. MTEs are that kind of event where chaos can happen. And if there's a truly chaotic sport where anything can happen, especially when it comes to, especially in March when it matters most, it's college basketball. So we'll just see how it pans out again. Seton Hall in the Charleston Classic starting 5 o'clock Thursday against VCU. I believe it's going to be on ESPN2. So it's either ESPN2 or ESPNU, one of the ESPN
No,
channels.
it's on the dreaded CBS Sports Network.
Oh God, no. Oh
Yeah,
God, help us.
yeah, no, no way. See, it is ESPN2. My mistake. I don't know why ESPN tells me it's on ESPN. So if ESPN doesn't know what's on ESPN, I thought my other app said CBS Sports Network. No, it's on ESPN too. So
Yeah,
there'll be
no.
it's St. John's who's on the CBS Sports Network,
Yeah, have fun with
which
Steve
is
Lapis, Johnny's fans.
which is I mean that's sort of, I mean, it's no slight against us or VCU, but I think that Baylor St. John's game has a little more juice to it. But it's still November. I mean, they're two ranked teams, but still, ranked teams don't. A lot of ranked teams don't make it to the NCAA tournament. So,
Mhm.
and a lot of unranked teams make it to the NCAA tournament. So we'll see how things go out in Charleston.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Hoist the Colors. We'll be back with one last episode before Thanksgiving. It'll be our last episode in the month of November. Hopefully, we'll be talking about a good experience for the Pirates down in Charleston. And then they got a bit of a stretch where they got basically a week off, and then they return to action. Their final game of November. 2 days after Thanksgiving, they'll welcome another New Jersey rival, the Monmouth Hawks. So for Tim Best, for Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. I'm gonna get this right by the end of the season, damn it. But anyways, we'll see you on the other side of the Charleston Classic. And until then, onward to Tonya. Go Pirates. Take care, y'all.